Joining us now is, as we promised, former British Commander Colonel Richard Kemp. Colonel Richard, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Now, we want to get some truth and honesty on what is actually happening in Gaza. We've just had our Prime Minister accusing the Israelis of all sorts of lack of humanity and all this sort of stuff. I apologise on behalf of all Australians for our government. They're an absolute joke. But anyway, Richard, you're there on the ground, or you have been recently. You know what's going on. Tell us the true story of what is happening in Gaza regarding aid.
Well, the problem with people like Mr. Albanese and also Mr. Starmer over here and the other leaders who are lashing out at Israel now is that they're encouraging Hamas. Hamas and the Israelis have been involved in peace talks in recent days. Hamas essentially pulled out of those peace talks, refused to make any form of compromise or offer in relation to the hostages they've got kidnapped. And this was partly due to the encouragement they've been given by international leaders like Mr. Albanese. The problem, the aid situation in Gaza is far more different from the way it's being portrayed by so much of the media these days. There is a kind of manufactured, sudden crisis in Gaza, humanitarian crisis. Of course, there is a big problem. There is a problem with aid. There's a problem with aid distribution. There is malnutrition, undoubtedly. I think the levels of starvation that are being talked about now are largely manufactured. But the reality is that any shortage of aid inside Gaza is due, first of all, to Hamas interdicting the aid, and secondly, to the refusal by the United Nations to cooperate effectively with Israel about getting the aid in. In the last few days, there have been something like 900 aid trucks inside Gaza, all cleared for distribution by the IDF, which the United Nations refused to deliver. It was just sitting there for days on end, aid that was badly needed inside Gaza. And only when Israel exposed the UN for what it was, in other words, its failure to do what it should be doing, did the UN then resume movement of aid. And I think in the last few days, last couple of days, something like 270 or maybe more now of those trucks have got in. But what we've got here is not Israel preventing aid getting through. It's Hamas, particularly Hamas, and the United Nations. And the United Nations' refusal to cooperate with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is an American private enterprise, which delivers millions and millions of meals directly to Gazans without them falling into the hands of Hamas. That's, broadly speaking, the situation. It's not what is being portrayed in so much of the media.
Well, I want to just read you a statement from our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, about that very issue. He says, Gaza is in the grip of a humanitarian catastrophe. Israel's denial of aid and the killing of civilians, including children seeking access to water and food, cannot be defended or ignored. We call on Israel to comply immediately with its obligations under international law. How true is what our Prime Minister has stated there? The denial of aid and in particular the killing of civilians, including children who are seeking access to food and water.
Well, I can't speak for everything that's been happening in Gaza, of course. I've been in there a few times in the recent weeks, and I've seen aid distribution by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. I don't know every detail of what's been happening there, but certainly my understanding, my interpretation, if you like, from everything I know about the IDF, and I know a great deal about the way the IDF operates, is that there is no way in the world the IDF is deliberately targeting women, children, or civilian men who are going to get aid. I'm sure that a number have been shot. I don't know how many. I'm sure the numbers that are coming out of the Gaza Health Ministry are grossly exaggerated. But I'm sure also that most of those who have been shot by Hamas rather than the IDF. The IDF may well have had cause to open fire in the direction of crowds around aid centres if those crowds approached the IDF and threatened the IDF, but they fire warning shots. And in that situation, you probably are going to get a degree of panic among the crowds, and then Hamas will join in. And Hamas undoubtedly will be the ones, if there's direct shots at the crowds, they'll be coming from Hamas. Israel is as far as I can see it, and from my understanding on the ground of what's happening, Israel is completely complying with its international humanitarian law obligations, both in respect of facilitating the delivery of aid and also in respect of not shooting at innocent civilians.
James.
Well, I mean, call me cynical here. We all know, Colonel, that Hamas, of course, has every interest in making Israel look horrible, and they have no problem in using Gazan civilians as fodder to do that. But if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like this sort of mentality of let's try and make Israel look as bad as possible and do whatever we can. Am I being cynical to suggest that possibly the UN is also in on some of this idea of trying to create a narrative that Israel really is the bad guy? Hamas, well, you know, they're Hamas, but, you know, Israel is the bad guy here. And that's being now piled on by Macron to a large extent, and to a lesser extent by leaders like Albanese who say, oh, well, they're the ones who are responsible here. It's now become the accepted media narrative that Netanyahu and Israel are the bad guys, and yet these guys seem to be using Gazan civilians as fodder to create that. It seems really morally offensive to me.
You're absolutely right. The UN is complicit with Hamas. We know about UNRWA's involvement, direct involvement with Hamas over many years, including UNRWA personnel taking part in the invasion on the 7th of October 2023, and UNRWA personnel, UNRWA officials holding kidnapped Israeli civilians inside Gaza. We know about this, and we know all about the complicity of UNRWA with Hamas. And of course, it's obvious they would be, because almost all members of UNRWA are Gazan civilians who come under the jurisdiction and under pressure from, whether willingly or unwillingly, they are basically on the side of Hamas. And the UN, UNRWA and the other elements of the UN have got a long history of being against Israel, of doing anything they can to make Israel look bad. And I don't know this for sure, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if the UN's withholding of aid and refusal to deliver the aid that I spoke about isn't all about trying to tar Israel as being the war criminals in this case, when, of course, the real war criminals are Hamas. It's a really disturbing situation. And the media, of course, and people like Albanese and Starmer and many of the other leaders in Macron and other leaders in Europe, they pile in on the side of the UN. Of course, you know, you won't. The story I told you about the UN withholding aid and then eventually, when they're exposed, having it delivered, or some of it delivered, that you won't see that story in most of the media, because it doesn't meet the media's agenda of blackening Israel and of course making the UN whiter than white.
Just very quickly before we go, we've got 30 seconds. Richard, Donald Trump has come out. We played the clips earlier. Firstly, he said that Macron recognising Palestine, well, that's not going to happen. And he's also said that Hamas must die. The end game now is Hamas must die. Your thoughts?
Hamas must die, and they're on the way to being killed. A huge number have been killed already. Israel is, I think, in the end game now of finishing off Hamas. But that's not helped by people like Albanese and Starmer and co, who are basically, it may be unintentionally, but they appear to be on the side of Hamas. There have been no demands on Hamas to end the war, no demands on Hamas to lay down their arms, only demands on Israel to end the war. It's completely one-sided, it's biased, and unfortunately the side they're on is the wrong side.
Hear, hear. Colonel Richard Kemp, always great to chat to you. Thanks for coming on Outsiders, and we'll speak again soon.